Today we're going to build a Goff 9-inch blast wheel, and these are the parts that are used to do it. The first step is to put the gasket for the base plate onto the base plate. So what we're going to do is we're going to put some silicone around the gasket, and then we're going to put the base plate right on top of it. And got the base or the gasket all set. Base plate right on over. Set it right on top of it. Now we're ready to continue with the assembly. Now we're going to put the blast wheel housing onto the base plate. Put it on there, line up the holes, and use a 1/2-inch bolt with a flat washer. Put it in there. Do not tighten these down at this time. Just snug them up because you're going to have to probably move them later for an adjustment purposes. All right. Next step is put the hub seal on the back of the housing. Use some 3/8 bolts. Take the split housing or the split hub seal. Start it on there. Put the top one on. You can snug these up. You may have to adjust these two also later. Usually not, but there's always a chance that it might be rubbing on the shaft of the motor, as the motor shaft's going to go through that hole. Okay, next we're going to put the motor onto the base plate. Set it down on the base plate. You got to feed the shaft through the hub seal mount that you just installed. Take your bolts. You got 6 of them. You're going to have 3 on each side of the motor to lag it down. I go around and start all 6 of them before we even begin to tighten them. Now that you have all 6 of them started in there, go around and tighten them up. You want to make sure that you get these pretty tight, or else your motor will start vibrating, and that's never a good thing. Now we're going to put the front and back liners on the blast wheel housing. They're the same liner for the front and the back. So what you do is you take the liner, it has to come in through the bottom. Go ahead and feed it up, and next you're going to attach it to the back of the housing. All right, go ahead and use your 1/2-inch bolt along with 2 flat washers. Go ahead and start it in there. Go ahead and put in all 4 of them, and then tighten them down. All right. Now that we've installed the back liner, we're going to install the front liner. Again, goes up through the bottom, lift it up, and put your fasteners on there and secure it. Now we're going to prep our bare wheel so we have it ready to install, which is the next thing we're going to have to do. First, you're going to take a roll pin, and you can put this roll pin in any one of these 4 holes of the bare wheel. Start it in there. You want to leave about 1/4 of an inch of the roll pin steel showing out. Okay, that's good. What that's going to do is that's going to lock our centering plate in when we get to that part of it. Also on the bare wheel, we install what's called shear rings. Shear rings are put in there. They are used to hold on the blade blocks. These are the blade blocks. We'll be installing them from inside the blast wheel. And the way these are going to go are like this. They're going to go into that shear ring, and the pin will go down into that hole. So you will be putting those in like that and bolting them in there. So they're going to look like that when we get them inside. And what these blade blocks do is the blade blocks are what hold the blades onto the bare wheel. Okay, and also on this bare wheel you have to install the taper lock adapter. So go ahead and put it in there and slide it all the way down into the bare wheel. Make sure it's down in there all the way. Now you're ready to install the bare wheel onto the motor shaft. Now we're going to install the bare wheel. Take your bare wheel over the top of the housing, put it back in the housing over the motor shaft. Then you take your taper lock and you can start it through the bare wheel and on the motor shaft. Okay. Align the key slot on the taper lock bushing with the motor shaft. Line that up. Then you can put your key in through the keyway opening. Slide it back in there. Then go ahead and line up the holes on the taper lock with the taper lock bushing that we put in there, and so that we can then start the screws in. As you can see right there, it's not lined up yet. These 2 holes, this one and this one, are used to pull the taper lock into the taper lock bushing. This one is actually used to release it when you go to take apart the wheel. So we'll be putting set screws in through these and torquing them down. Now we put the set screws into the taper lock bushing and tighten it down. Of course, before we can tighten it down, we have to set exactly where we want that taper lock located on the motor shaft. But go ahead and start your screws in there. Go ahead and adjust the taper lock bushing as to where you want it. It's going to be about 1/8 of an inch from the end of the motor shaft. So it's just barely in there, almost flush actually. Right about there. I'm just going to snug these down. There is a torque setting for them, but I don't have anything to hold the bare wheel with in order to torque it. But after we get a blade block on there, then we'll be able to set the torque spec. So right now they're just snugged up so it don't move. Now we're going to attach a blade block. Make sure that you have your shear ring either in the blade block or in the bare wheel, and you use the Allen head bolt through the blade block. Go ahead and start it in there. Okay, start that in there, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my thumbs and I'm going to start to tighten that Allen head bolt in there. Next we're going to attach the blade block and tighten it down. To tighten it down you have to have a short Allen 3/8, and what I use is a ratcheting 3/8 wrench. I go ahead and put the stubby into the wrench, go on down here and feed it into the socket cap screw. Okay, go ahead and tighten up your socket cap screw. You want to make sure that you get this in there really tight and that there's no gap between your blade block and your bare wheel. You want to make sure that that's in there really tight. Okay. So now that you got the first one on there, you can go ahead and continue putting the rest of them on there. They go on the same way, all 4 of them. Okay, after you get your first blade block on, you can use a set of vise grips, attach it to the blade block, and that'll steady your wheel. Go ahead and continue around putting all the blade blocks on. This is the last one. Make sure again that you get them good and tight. All right. Now that you can steady the bare wheel, we can torque down the taper lock. It's about 15 foot-pounds. I'm using a torque wrench. Secured the bare wheel so I can torque it. Make sure you get both of them torqued equally. Go back and forth a couple times to make sure. There we go. Now we're going to attach the blades. The blades are held on with a spring. You put the spring down in the blade block. Okay, the blade's going to go down, going to push down on it, and then pull back on it, and it's going to attach into this bottom lip of the blade block. So again, take the blade, put the spring down in that portion of the blade. It's sitting there. I put my hand in there and I hold back on this blade so that when I get it down, I can pull it back and lock it in. So push down on the blade, and it locked right in. I know you probably didn't see it, but you probably hear it. Again, just go around and you put all of them in there. You want to be careful too so that you don't bend that spring. That's why I'm holding back on it with my hand. But there they are, they're all locked in. You can see down in here where it's locked in on the bottom. Now we're going to install the cage retainer and the cage adapter. You want to get these lined up so that the holes through the cage retainer and cage adapter line up accordingly, as you can see. So I'm going to put the retainer on in this position. So you got to take and slide up through the bottom of your blast wheel. Bring it up there, line this up, and then take your studs, your mounting studs, and go through the hole over here, through the housing. Do that on both sides here. Now that I've got them slid through there, you can tighten them down with these nuts. Before you tighten them all the way down with the nuts, again, you're going to probably have to be doing some adjustment at a later state. But for now, we're going to try and line it up with the hole in here as best we can, center it. We want these studs going side to side here. And what those studs are going to do is they're going to hold your feed spout in place on the blast wheel. Go ahead and snug them up. Again, you may be loosening them and readjusting it later. Now we're going to put the centering plate and then the control cage into the blast wheel housing. Go ahead and take your centering plate, that notch in the centering plate. It's going to feed into that roll pin that you put in the bare wheel earlier. So what I do is I put it in there, and I kind of hold on to it a little bit with my fingers up on the top, and then take your control cage, that'll go in just like that, and use your bolts to just kind of hold that in place. Don't tighten it down yet, obviously you're going to have to adjust it. Now we're going to install the impeller. Again, make sure that that centering plate is on that roll pin. Here it is, okay. Now I'm going to take my impeller and I'm going to slide it back in. These notches on the impeller will go through the centering plate in the back. They'll line up, okay? So now that I've got it in there and lined up, I'm going to hold that in place. I'm going to take the bolt that attaches it to the motor shaft, feed it in through the impeller and into the motor shaft. Now we also have to torque this down too. Your impeller gets torqued at 15 foot-pounds. I'd go ahead and stick a bar in the blast wheels to keep it from turning. Go ahead and torque her down. Right there, she's already torqued, okay? Now we're going to adjust our distances between our control cage and our impeller and our control cage and the centering plate. If you notice, there's a gap in there and there's also a little gap in here, okay? That gap should be about equal. And the way you can do that is by moving your housing. See how that's changing the distance in there? So I'm going to get it about equal. And then I'm going to lock down my housing. Okay? I still may have to move the housing again, but first I'm just getting that distance in line, and then I'm going to lock it down. And then we'll come back and make more adjustments, because as you see right now, if you hear, it's rubbing. See? So we're gonna get rid of that rub here in a second. Okay, now as far as our rubbing, I believe it might be happening because of where our cage retainer and our cage adapter are at. If you notice, there's very little distance up on top here, on top of the impeller, versus down here. So I'm thinking that it all has to move up that way. All right. So what you do is you have to loosen up your nuts and your bolts, holding these together, and then you can move that up. Okay. Now see, right now it's not moving. Okay. So what that tells me is that's touching the front liner in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to loosen these 4 bolts up, and I'm going to pull my front liner up, and then I'm going to retighten these down. Now I should have room to move cage adapter and cage retainer. Just a very little bit there. Snug them down, and then I'm going to see if I took care of that rub that we had on the inside. But everything here looks fairly even now. Okay, I've still got a little bit of rub. Okay, so I'm thinking that it's the housing's got to move around a little bit. So I'm going to loosen it up. Loosen my 4 bolts up on my housing. Okay, and like I said, I've still got a little rub there, so I'm going to move my housing around. Make sure I maintain my clearances. Right there, the rub is gone. So I'm going to tighten down the housing right where it is. I've still maintained my clearance inside in between my control cage and my impeller. I've still got the distances in there which you need. And tighten down my housing all the way around, all 4 bolts. And make sure that I've still got my good clearances. I've still got a slight rub, but I think it's coming from the hub seal in the back, so we're going to check that now. To adjust the hub seal, you have to loosen these up slightly. You can pull it up and then tighten it back in, because there is adjustment there. So I snugged that top one in, and I'm going to check it, make sure the rub is gone. And pull that bottom one up and tighten it in there. Now that I've made all the adjustments to get rid of the rub, you can still see that I maintain the clearances in here between the control cage, the impeller, and the control cage and the centering plate, and we don't have a rub now. Now that we've taken care of all the rubs and all that, we have to set our control cage. Your control cage is typically the trailing edge of your control cage, which this is the trailing edge because our blast wheel is going in that direction. You want that 180 degrees opposite of where you're blasting from, or where you're blasting to, I mean. So we're going to be blasting straight out the other side, so we want this trailing edge straight up and down. So what you do is you loosen up your control cage with the two bolts out front, and then you can turn your control cage. Just turn it till you get it to where you want it. So this particular one, just a little more. Right there's about 180 degrees, that's straight up and down. So I'm going to hold that in there, and I'm going to snug it down. Again, now that I move that, I want to make sure that I'm still not getting any rub anywhere. We're not, everything's good. And that's it. Again, you'll make your final adjustments on this once you get it into the machine and you set your blast pattern. But with this in mind, it will always get you close to the center of the blast pattern. Okay, now that we've got the blast wheel, pretty much the internals done on it, we're going to put the top curve liner in there, drop it down in there, line it up pretty much straight across. Go ahead and put your square head bolts on the outside here and snug them in there against that top curve liner. Don't have to bear down on them, just snug them. Okay, after that top curve liner goes in, then you put the lid onto the blast wheel housing. Take a look at the rubber liner on the inside of the housing, make sure it's in good shape, and this one is. So then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set it up there, and these line up top. I usually put double washers on, and then my 1/2 inch nut on both sides. Now usually before I tighten them down, I back these off. That way they're not pushing against that top curve liner yet until I get the lid all the way tightened down. So I've got them backed off. Now I want to tighten down this lid. I've got it centered up. I'm going to tighten it down. Now that I got that tightened down, then I'm going to go ahead back and I'm going to snug these up. And what they do is they help that top curve liner also stay down in the position. You don't have to bear down on them, just snug them up. Okay, now for the feed spout. Take the feed spout, I'll put a little bit of silicone around the outside edge here, just a little bit. It's going to help that feed spout seal hold into place. Go ahead and put your feed spout seal on there. Go ahead. Your feed spout going to go in this way. This one is fed from this direction, okay? And I put the feed spout retainers on there. This will tighten it into place and hold it securely on there. Let's snug them up. Now the last thing that you have to do is you can put in these, again, square head bolts in the bottom here of your housing. And what they're going to do is they're going to hold your end liners in place. We're not going to put the end liners in right now. Normally you put your blast wheel assembly on your machine and then you can slide your end liners in from inside the machine. But they'll slide up in here and you tighten them down with your square head bolt. Now these here end liners, they're dovetail design. They'll lock in with that top curve liner. So make sure you get them up in there all the way.